Hello and welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. I'm Tim Hayes. I'm your host for the first hour. And today is Wednesday, March 12th, 2025. As always, we're grateful to everyone who's joining us here today, whether you're listening live or through the archives, as we spend another couple of hours teaching and supporting people in using some of the most powerful, effective, efficient, and accessible tools I've ever encountered. These tools are available absolutely free through the tireless efforts of Dr. Michael and Jeannie Rice on the website at whyagain.org. And if you go to that website and click on the two words that say Start Here in the upper left-hand corner, it will take you to a page where you can download and read Chapter 24 of Dr. Michael Rice's book. His book is titled, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? And that chapter of the book contains a narrative description and explanation of the primary tool in this work. That tool is called the Reality Management Worksheet, sometimes called the Reality Management Wake-Up Sheet. And it's a tool I've been using to great effect for over 20 years now to improve the quality of my life and most of my relationships, and to turn any negative emotional experience I have into part of the infallible guidance system that each and every one of us has been given. From that page, you can also download the actual worksheet process itself, a simple PDF file. Click the link, download it, print it off, copy it as often as you'd like, and use it over and over again absolutely free. You can also download a whole host of audio files of shows just like this one where people have been stepped through that worksheet process. And if you choose to listen to them even repeatedly, they can serve as a powerful tutorial for you to help you get maximum benefit from these tools in the shortest amount of time possible. And you can also go to your app store and type in the three words Heartland Aramaic Forgiveness. If you choose to do that before you're done typing the word forgiveness, you'll see a glowing heart icon. If you tap on that, it will let you download a completely free and private app that contains the Reality Management Worksheet. It contains an abbreviated version of that worksheet process, and it contains a copy of the Dragon Klingon game, which is a wonderful way to introduce these tools to even younger audiences. And we hope people do all of that soon and often, primarily because it tends to improve the quality of people's lives the more they actively apply these tools in their lives. And secondarily, because it tends to prompt comments, questions, answers, and testimonials. If you have any of those to share with us, you can email me at tjh@mindshifters-academy.org, or you can email Jeannie at jeanie@whyagain.org. That's whyagain.org. If you're listening to us live at live.needle.com/mindshiftersradio on the web, we're glad you're here. But from that platform, you can't type a comment or talk to us voice to voice. So if you want to do that, you need to download the Needle app. It's N-E-D-L, Needle for Live Radio, AI tuner for live radio. And if you download that app, answer a few questions, it'll give you the option to either type a comment in the chat room or talk to us voice to voice if you click the phone icon. So we greatly appreciate whenever anybody does that, whether they send us an email or a text or a comment in the app or talk to us voice to voice, because it makes it infinitely easier for us to live into our intention with this work. The intention we have with this work is to be of service. And that is just boatloads easier to do when we know how these things are landing for you. So please let us know how we might be of more service, and or how the conversations that we have occasionally with other listeners are stirring up things for you, good, bad, and otherwise. Whether we're talking about the mechanism of judgment and its benefits and its detriments, or whether we're talking about this this thing that we call the energy of love, which some would say is the energy of creation, what we're made of, or whether we're talking about your value as a person. If any of these conversations are resonating with you and either raising comments or questions or stirring up old trauma memories, we're here to support you in working through that stuff. And we have a whole host of tools that Michael and Jeannie make available free. And we have this time, thanks to the efforts and financial support of Michael and Jeannie Rice, to be available to be of assistance. How can we be of assistance to you? We had our support group last night, and somebody in the support group process noticed that when I said something about the many, many, many different versions of the Reality Management Worksheet that are out there, I used the word, these blasted worksheets, and they noted that, oh, when you say that word, that means you've got some kind of an irritation or an upset. You want to do a worksheet. And, my response was no. At that point in time, me doing a worksheet on that would have been a distraction from the process in the group. And then they came back to it later and said, well, if you don't do a worksheet on it, aren't you just burying it? And I said, well, here's the idea. The idea is, if I'm still thinking about this tomorrow, the next day, or the next day, even if my thoughts are nice and calm and I say, oh, that was interesting, and I chuckle about it, but if I'm still thinking about it 2 or 3 days later, it's probably a really good thing for me to do some worksheets on. On the other hand, if I'm noticing the irritation when it comes up, I label it as something I'm creating, I breathe and soften, I cancel any goals I have just on the fly, like the mental short version of the Reality Management Worksheet, and I'm calm and I get back to whatever the conversation was. In this case, it was an interaction with a patient in my office. Then there isn't any need for me to switch up the whole routine in my day to call a halt to everything and decide I'm going to do worksheets on this. Because I may or may not have residual energy to get dissipated about that. If in the moment I use the mental short version of the worksheet process, identify the thought, oh, I have some irritation, the emotion, and I say, oh, the thought is because this is unnecessarily complicated, and my goal is I just want this to be more simple, and I breathe and soften and cancel the thought and cancel the goal. If my upset level dissipates to next to nothing, there's no necessity in that point in time for me to dig in and do a long 7-step worksheet, etc. And yet, just to reiterate, even if I think about it 2 or 3 days later and my thoughts are, oh, isn't that silly that this happened? If I'm thinking about it, chances are that's my mind trying to give me the indication that there's work to be done there. And when I continually focus on myself, when I continually remind myself that I'm the one creating my emotions, and I continually work at understanding that when I have an intense emotion, whether it's a positive or a negative experience for me, that energy will absolutely change. I often use the word distort. It'll change, if not distort, my perception. And if what I'm doing with my mind energy is distorting my perception, that means I'm not clear. I'm not wide open and awake and in direct relationship with life as it's going on. I'm in a dream state, even more than normal. And being, walking around, if you have somebody who's literally sleepwalking, pretty much everybody that I know understands that's not a safe situation. Well, likewise, for me, if I'm in any kind of an intense emotional state, that's not the best way for me to walk around in my life. That's not going to allow me accurate, or at least close to accurate, perception of the flow of life around me. So with the benefit of that awareness and the benefit of these tools, I have the option to step into a process that can restore me to calm, restore me to a clearer ability to perceive. So that's my preference these days. After having been introduced to these tools and having seen the benefit in my life of applying them on a regular basis, that's my preference. Now, since then, and the interaction in the group last night, I've had a number of other situations come up that are basically calling me to do worksheets on them. And, some of them are about emotions like overwhelm that I was generating this morning, and some of them are about irritation, emotions I was generating last night and this morning. And so those are things that I will step right into doing a worksheet on. And do those worksheets before I have any kind of an extended interaction with the people in my environment related to those topics. So I'm not going to, if I can keep those energies and emotions compartmentalized, then I can go on with my day for a while. But if it starts bubbling into and bleeding over into my interactions with people, it's not useful. It's not wise for me to delay. It's far better for me to call a timeout and pull out a worksheet or do a series of tapping sessions to dissipate the upset I'm creating. So, how's this landing for you? What are your thoughts about using the worksheet and in what situations? And what is the last worksheet you did and the upset that was there? Or shall we go back to trying to wrap up the reading with commentary of the book by Alan Cohen, Of Course in Miracles? According to my Kindle, we only have 20 pages left. So, in the absence of a comment or a caller on the line, I will return to the reading of Course in Miracles, subtitled When Love Becomes a Way of Life, by Alan Cohen. Chapter 24 is titled, We All Go Home Together. And Alan writes, an ancient Hindu fable tells of a spiritual seeker who hears there is a portal to heaven at the top of the Himalayas. So he sets out on the arduous trek with his loyal dog at his side. Together, the two traverse the daunting terrain. They ford angry rivers. They push through heavy snowstorms. Finally, they arrive at the summit of a high mountain where the sacred portal opens. A brilliant light pierces the clouds, and an angel appears who informs the aspirant that he can now enter heaven, but he will have to leave his dog behind. The man thinks for a short moment and then tells the angel, "If my dog cannot get into heaven with me, I'm not going." At that moment, the dog transforms and reveals his true identity as Krishna, and the two enter paradise together. The story is a metaphor for the journey to God that we all share. We can substitute any valued person or pet for the role of the dog in this story. Why would you want to get into heaven if it doesn't welcome those that you love? And then Alan says in parentheses, personally, I would be very wary of any heaven that did not accept dogs, because these creatures bring heaven to earth for us humans. And then he's got a quote from the Course in Miracles where it says, there is no obstacle that you can place before the union that you'll have with your Creator, because in your holy relationship, I am there already. We will surmount all obstacles together, for we stand within the gates and not outside of them. How easily the gates are opened from within to let peace through to bless the tired world. Alan writes, the ego's constant question is, what's in it for me? While Spirit's question is, how can this work for all of us? Partners of narcissistic people complain that their mate's motto is, it's all about me. And yet, I saw a bumper sticker I really liked that said, it's all about we. Alan writes, one of my friends was in a Tokyo subway car when the city's electricity failed after the massive 2011 earthquake. When the passengers realized the electricity was not going to be restored quickly, they calmly exited the train car and found their way to a ladder to the street. There they all helped each other ascend to safety. No one panicked, and no one ran ahead of the group. Their motto was, we're all in this together, so let's cooperate to get everyone free. That scene is reminiscent of the 2009 January day when an airplane was forced to make an emergency landing in New York's Hudson River. When a boat captain on the river observed the plane's dilemma, they guided their vessels to the site and made themselves available to rescue passengers. Meanwhile, the pilot, Chesley Sully Sullenberger, stayed with the aircraft and patrolled the cabin until he was sure that all the passengers and crew had exited safely. He assumed responsibility for the well-being of everyone on his aircraft. Then he quotes A Course in Miracles in the textbook where it says, your mind will elect to join with mine, and together we are invincible. Alan writes, then there was the moment in Kazakhstan when a dog fell down a steep concrete embankment and got caught on the edge of a raging canal. If the dog slipped or the canal rose, the creature would surely have been swept to its death. A passerby, who had compassion for the dog's dilemma, slid down the slope to help it. On the bank above, 6 men gathered and held hands to form a human chain, and they descended the steep embankment until they were able to grasp the frightened pooch and pass it up to safety. You can see that on the YouTube channel if you type in most intense human chain ever, rescues dog stranded in canal. Then Alan quotes A Course in Miracles where it says, what we can accomplish together has no limits, because the call for God is the call to the unlimited. And he writes, A Course in Miracles underscores that all healing is shared. The Course tells us many times that joining is the will of God and yields far more powerful results than pursuing separate interests. Only the ego believes that good is given to one at the expense of another. Ellen writes, "For many years I've been practicing the motto, 'There is no private good.' If something is truly good for you, it will bless others as well." On a hot Seattle afternoon, Dee and I went into a restaurant where the hostess seated us beneath the duct of an air conditioning unit that blew cold air on us. After a while, we were quite chilly. We wanted to ask the waiter to reseat us, but we'd already been served our appetizer, and I felt guilty about bothering the waiter. But eventually we decided to trust our instinct, and the waiter kindly reseated us several tables away from the duct. A few minutes later, the hostess seated an elderly couple at the table that we had vacated. As soon as they sat down, the man smiled and issued a long sigh of relief. "Ah, cool air, just what I needed," he said with a smile. Then he quotes A Course in Miracles from the textbook where it says, quote, "Brother, we heal together as we live together and love together." Close quotes. One of the most famous affirmations of oneness came in 1914 during World War I. As Christmas approached, British and German troops had been bitterly battling for 5 months. In honor of the holiday, armies decided to call off the war for a day and celebrate together. Over 100,000 soldiers from both sides got together, shared dinner, gave each other gifts, took photographs with one another, and some played football in the land between the two sides. What an inspiring demonstration that we can choose peace when we hold that intention. So then he quotes the Course in Miracles. He quotes the Course in Miracles where it says, "You and your brother will yet come together in my name, and your sanity will be restored." Then he quotes the Course in Miracles again where it says, "Alone, we can do nothing. But together, our minds fuse into something whose power is far beyond the power of its separate parts. By not being separate, the mind of the Creator is established in ours and as ours. The mind, capital M mind, of the Creator is invincible because it is undivided." Then Ellen writes, "Agreement is powerful because every thought is creative. Whatever we agree on becomes true in our experience. Where two or more are gathered in my name, there I am with them." This is a quote from Matthew 18:20. We can gather in the name of love, or we can gather in the name of fear. The crazy world seems real only because lots of people believe in it. When we withdraw our belief in illusions, only truth remains. Then he quotes the textbook in the Course in Miracles where it says, "Brother, you need forgiveness of your brother, for you will share in madness or in heaven together." And again, the Course in Miracles and the Way of Mastery define forgiveness as dismantling judgments and perceptions. It does not mean letting somebody else off the hook. First, forming the belief that I'm upset because they did this horrible thing, and then deciding to be the bigger person. That's not forgiveness in this work. Forgiveness in this work is a tool that I use to go within inside myself and dismantle anything that's less then a perception which leads me to the awareness of my true nature as love, as this energy of creation expressing in form. And then Alan writes, to the ego, bodies being together constitutes unity. But we've all had the experience of being with someone physically while feeling separate spiritually. Nothing is lonelier than physical proximity coupled with spiritual absence. You can be lying next to somebody in bed, but you feel worlds apart. The Japanese have a saying, same bed, different dreams. And by contrast, you can have a dear friend or family member who lives thousands of miles away and whom you see rarely, but when you think about them, you feel totally connected. When you meet after a long time, you feel as though you've never been apart. One instant together with your brother restores the universe to both of you. That's a quote from the Course in Miracles. Another quote from the Course in Miracles, the textbook 22 says, and so they wander through a world of strangers, unlike themselves, living with their bodies perhaps under a common roof that shelters neither, in the same room and yet a world apart. Alan writes, while we believe we are separate from the Creator, from each other and ourselves, it is not the truth. Unity is truth, division is illusion. We do not need to do anything to make oneness happen. We just need to drop the belief that we're isolated. I saw a photo of a couple sitting on a couch beside one another, each wearing a virtual reality headset. Each person was completely immersed in a reality that was divorced from the other. This is the story of many relationships and the world. We're all walking around wearing a VR headset, watching our own distinct movie. If you want, as a sidebar, if you want more evidence of this, you can go to your YouTube channel and type in Anil Seth, first name Anil, N-A-N-I-L, Anil, last name Seth, S-E-T-H, and you can watch a 17 or 20-minute video he has as a TED Talk, and he has longer videos. He's a researcher researching perception. And if you don't come up with that right away, you can type in, Anil Seth, hallucinating perception, or just perception. And there's a series of talks he's given about the state of their research into what is the mechanism that we use to create our perception. And essentially, he's saying we're already, each of us is hallucinating our images of the world, whether it's sights or sounds. We're all just making it up. And it's a powerful video. It's a powerful set of examples. I'm not sure that, the questions or conclusions he reaches at the end are rock solid. And yet, the fact of the matter is, our government knows that perception does not record reality. Our perception constructs reality for each of us. That's why we can have 7 people, on a street corner when an accident happens in the intersection and have 7 different versions of what happened. So we don't have to put on virtual reality headsets in order for us to have a very different perception of the people standing right next to us. Alan goes on and writes, and yet the moment comes when we tire of the fragmented movie that we're creating, and we decide, wait a minute, there has to be more. So we courageously remove our blinders, and we discover a reality that far transcends the tiny, mad idea that our ego has conjured up. in that expanded world, that's where we find each other. I know a number of people who through DNA testing have found their birth mother after being adopted and connected with valued relatives they've never met. In many cases, they report that their sense of reunion and homecoming is life-changing. My friend Charlene's mother had become pregnant as a teenager. She never told the father he had a child, and she gave the baby up for adoption. When Charlene, at the age of 35, finally found her father, his family threw her a welcoming party. When Charlene entered the room, she was greeted by a huge shout of, "It's a girl!" and a sign to that effect above the door. We're all destined for a momentous homecoming that far transcends Charlene's. We are certain to one day actually remember who we are, where we came from, and where we're headed. We will drop our false identity as separated, bereft, sinful souls and reclaim our true identity as innocent, lovable, divine beings. That day is closer than you think. Shall we meet it today? Then he quotes from the textbook of the Course in Miracles where it says, "You and your brother are coming home together after a long and meaningless journey that you undertook. And it led you nowhere. After all of that, you found your brother, and you will light each other's way. And from this light will the great rays extend back into darkness and forward into the Creator, to shine away the past, and so to make room for the Creator's eternal presence, in which everything is radiant in the light." And then he offers these miraculous insights or questions at the end of the chapter. Question number 1. Is heaven exclusive for people who think like you do, or does everyone have a right to enter heaven? That's a question for people who've been raised in various religions. And various religions teach that unless people belong to our religion and they say our words the way we say them and we pray the way we pray, then they're not going to heaven. They're going to hell. Second question. Would you not enter heaven if you had to leave someone that you love behind, knowing they could not go to heaven? Would you go to heaven? Or would you choose not to enter? Third question. What challenging situations have you overcome because you joined with one or more other persons and made a team effort? Last question. How would you be living your life differently if you knew you were never separated from your Creator? You carry the Creator with you, and that the love of the Creator always surrounds and supports you. And then he offers these affirmations. The Creator lives in me, through me, with me, and for me. I deserve heaven, as do all of the children of creation. I delight in joining with others to achieve our valued goals. I am one with the family of spirit. So that's the reading. There's an epilogue which is available, which I'm not going to go into right now. I'm going to ask, since we have so many callers on the app, for comments, questions. I have, as I mentioned earlier, I have worksheets I can do. I have time to step someone through a worksheet process. The point of this show is to be of service. So if there is a way in which anyone on the call could use support, please let us know. Again, if you're listening on live.needle.com/mindshiftersradio, you can't type a comment or raise a hand to be a caller. you'd need to download the Needle app, N-E-D-L, Needle, AI Tuner for Live Radio from your app store. Download it, open it up, answer a couple questions, and then you have the capacity to be a caller or a commenter. How can we support you today? What's on your mind? How is it landing for you to be reading the book with commentary from Alan Cohen titled Of Course in Miracles, When Love Becomes a Way of Life? Again, the reason for this podcast, internet show, whatever you want to call it, is to support people in learning and using a body of tools that Michael and Jeannie Rice make available on the website at whyagain.org. And the primary tool in that work is called the Reality Management Worksheet. And it's a tool I can use anytime I have upset to dismantle the source of that upset within me. I have attempted to open the phone line for Julia.
Good morning.
Welcome.
So I do have a question because I've listened to Anil Seth, and I want to ask your opinion on his thoughts that there's no life after death, that once we this consciousness leaves this body, it's done. There's no continuation. Have you heard him say that?
Yeah, I heard him make reference to that, and that's why I say at some point near the end of his talk, the 2 or 3 different talks that I've heard him say, he launches into a set of beliefs or observations, or extrapolating out from what he's been able to measure, and I think he takes huge leaps, and I can't go with him on those because it doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, the energetic synchronicities and experiences that I've personally had and so many people I work with have had, they just don't fit with, we're nothing but a mass of protoplasm. Or that consciousness is simply the result of random neural firing. And there are people like, 2 people. There's a woman who had huge cancer tumors all over her, and they went in and she was clinically dead, and she had her afterlife, before life death experience, whatever you want to call it. Dr. Michael Rice would call it a near life experience. And she came back. And when she came back, she could report to people what had happened in the hospital while she was clinically brain dead. Right? And then there was a neurosurgeon who had an infection in his brain that completely shut down his brain. And he wrote a book about the 7 or 8 days, whatever it was, when he was clinically brain dead, and how he had a vivid experience that he remembered and had access to information that, if you believe you're just a physical body having a physical experience, couldn't have happened. And prior to that, his absolute rock-solid belief, the way he'd been trained in science, was that consciousness is simply the byproduct of random neural firings, that there is no such thing as a separate consciousness. And after he had his own personal experience, he had to revise that. And he's done, book tours promoting his book and lectures, and so I can't agree with Anil saying that there is nothing but this physical realm, especially because if you integrate things like quantum physics and quantum mechanics, there's, it throws the door open to realize that there's a lot more going on here than our five senses can register. So that's all I can say about that. I don't know for certain, but I can't agree with anybody who says we have nothing but the physical realm.
I agree with you. Yeah, yeah, I agree with you also. Is that person that was that Eben Alexander you
It
were
is.
talking about?
Yeah, Eben Alexander. The title of his book is bouncing around on the tip of my tongue, but Eben
Yeah.
Alexander and Anita Moorjani is the other woman who had her near-life experience and came back, and she also does lectures and talks, and she wrote the book Dying to Be Me, I think is the title of her book.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard her story too. It's fascinating. Yeah, I was surprised when Anil went down in that direction with his talk. I was like, oh.
Well, don't be surprised whenever you hear that from somebody who's a scientist, because that's where they're pouring all of their energy. That's what they've identified with. And that body of thought, that school of thought says we're just physical. And that's how we're going to come up with all these answers and these magical cures for things, is because all there is what we can see and measure. And if you open it up to things existing beyond what you can see and measure, then now you have to tolerate things that you don't have any control over. And that's a challenge for people who like to think they know it all. Or that if they don't know it all, someday they just work hard enough and they will. So,
Yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I'm really enjoying the Ellen Cohen book. So thank you for reading that. And then yesterday we were talking about Susan and her hip or her leg, and I mentioned that my symptoms were just like hers, and then you had said that in your experience that's not an arthritic related. And so I was wondering, in your experience, do you have any other?
Okay, so the piece that you're missing, and you mentioned that you'd missed part of the show yesterday in your text. The reason I'm saying that what Susan's describing doesn't fit bone-on-bone arthritis is because the pain travels around. So it'll be in her hip, and then her hip won't hurt, but her knee will, and then her back will hurt, but not her knee or her hip. And so when that kind of thing happens, it's an indication that this is a mental emotional issue, and or there's awfully loud water noise there, Julia. Are you playing in the water?
Oh,
Did you take us
I
into the
tapped.
bathtub with you?
Well, I did not. I was just rinsing my hands. I just fed my dog, but I tapped the microphone and it looked like I was muted, but I guess that
It did
doesn't mute
not
you.
mute. It did not
Okay,
mute.
I won't do that anymore.
Well,
Sorry. I
yeah,
I just
it's all
wanted.
right. It's just now I have to go to the bathroom. Now I have to
I'm
go
so
number one because
sorry.
the water makes me think, oh, I need to go to the bathroom. So anyway, what I was saying is the reason it doesn't sound like bone on bone with Susan is she has reported that it's not consistent and it moves. And that's the thing that you were missing in the conversation.
No,
And
I
so
did hear
and so
that though.
it's much more like what Dr. John Sarno came to label tension myoneural syndrome, which means mental emotional tension that's locked in tissue, and whenever it gets resonated into activity, it can cause the tissue to contract or muscles to spasm, and if they do that in such a way that they block the flow of blood flow to tissue, even by as little as 10%, it's enough to cause excruciating pain. And that's why so many people have had success talking to their body, doing the mental emotional work, doing the EFT tapping, doing the neuro-emotional technique work to uncover and then release unconscious emotional trauma, energy, and tension, and then be amazed at how the pain or stiffness or restriction of motion disappears.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert on it by any means, but I had all those same symptoms, and so I went to an osteo doctor and two different ones, and they both said, well, you have arthritis. And I know Susan said she has really good hips, that's not the problem for her. But yeah, and I've listened and read all of Dr. Sarno's stuff, and I totally agree with you about the mental aspect of storing things in our bodies. And so, yeah, it's just interesting stuff. And I'm glad that there's more information available for people, especially people suffering from chronic pain. And I have tried every different thing to try to overcome the physical sensations in my leg. And because also I've heard that, people can have like the most horrendous looking degenerate hips or spines and they're in no pain, or they can have like a perfect x-ray and they're in excruciating pain. So but then that's usually connected.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that Dr. Sarno used to reach his conclusions.
Yes. And I
And
really
now,
like his work.
my app didn't tell me that there were comments, but Susan Bingham has typed in, it turns out that it was a hernia operation that left scarring for her, and then she wrote, mental emotional component is still operant, though. So
Yeah.
the biggest point that I make with this with people is these are not mutually exclusive. They're both going on all the time. And, when I had playing roller hockey at age 45 and snapped my ankle in half, I wasn't going to wish that away, right?
Yeah.
There were a couple of broken bones and a shredded ligament, and so there needed to be a physical intervention there. At the same time, I didn't need to berate myself about being stupid or, trying to do the, be younger than my age and risking hurting myself and not being there for my kids. I didn't need to pile on all those negative thoughts. And the more I piled on those negative thoughts, the more stress I felt, the less I recovered quickly, etc. The more I used EFT tapping and the neuro-emotional technique and dissipated those negative thoughts and the negative emotions that they were generating, the quicker I recovered and the better I felt and the less pain meds I needed. So these two things are always going on simultaneously. They're not separate. The body and mind are not separate entities. That's been my experience, and that's the point we're trying to make. We're not trying to tell anybody, oh, don't go have a hip surgery or don't have your orthopedic doctor look at your knee problem. That's not coming from anybody on this show. It's just that if you're having the discomfort and you're trying to figure out what to do with it, it's a really good idea to explore both options. And rather than just take pain meds to numb out the discomfort, it's probably highly preferable for you to do the mental emotional work as you go see the medical professionals to get their opinion. And then you make an informed choice about how to proceed.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I heard a Course of Miracles teacher say that when you have something like this going on, to just welcome it, right? And just be with it and say, what does this have to do with me? Not the little me, but, the higher self, I guess, is what they're referring to. But so that's also something that I've heard. And what are your thoughts about just welcoming it?
Well, the first response I have to that is, if I don't welcome it, I'm fighting against it, and I don't even understand it. I can't, if I don't welcome it, I can't study it and truly understand it, and then make the best choice about how to proceed. Right? If I'm just full of vitriol and venom and anger about any discomfort that happens, or like the snapped ankle that I talked about, if I was just beating myself up constantly over it, I just make it worse. But if I say, oh, well, this has happened and this is here for me to deal with, that's my interpretation of welcoming it. And so now what's mine to do in this moment? And asking myself, asking life, asking spirit, whoever you want to talk to in your unconscious or conscious mind, asking, okay, what's mine to do with this? How can I bring my presence and my loving energy into this in a way that ends up blessing me and others as a result of this? And because I've been doing that for enough years, there was another time after the ankle where I had tripped and broken and dislocated a toe on my other foot. And it was 3 a.m, and my sister drove me to the hospital, and here's a young doctor who's, after they take the x-ray and they see, because the toe is pointing in the wrong direction, right? You can clearly see there's a problem here, right? So they do an x-ray, and then the doctor, the young doctor on call, comes in and decides that he's going to set the toe right there. Now, I've already been doing EFT tapping for about an hour or more at that point, and I was just there on the gurney, tapping away. He grabs the toe, pulls it out, slaps it back in. You can hear popping and cracking. He releases it, and the toe bounces back to where it was. He tries that 3 times. Now, because I'm tapping and breathing and centering myself and constantly asking, what's mine to do here to bless myself and others, I had the presence of mind to tell him, okay, don't worry about it. It's not going back in place. Let's just call my orthopedic surgeon, the guy who did my other ankle a few years ago. I have this condition, they call it stork foot, because, the tendons are short. He goes, what? I go, yeah, just, it's going to be okay. And he was breaking a sweat. He's in a panic now because he knows that what he's doing is very uncomfortable for my foot. And instead of me yelling at him, I just calmly said, let's just call Dr. Berg. Now, I couldn't have done that if I hadn't been centered and breathing and doing EFT tapping and literally asking myself, what's mine to do here to bless myself and others? So in that sense, that's what I think of when you say, here's this Course in Miracles teacher that says, welcome it. Okay? I'm not glad that this happened, but I'm not going to ignore that it's happened. And I'm not going to use the fact that it's happened as an excuse for me to be angry and rude to other people if I can help it. Does that make sense?
Yes, so you're not going to be a victim of it, of the situation. And
Well, I'm not going to create the dream of being a victim. Yes.
yeah,
Because there are no victims, right?
yeah,
In one way of looking at it, you can spin the kaleidoscopic wheel of interpretation until it looks like, oh, here's an event, here's me as a competent spiritual being with a choice on how to respond to this event. That's my interpretation as often as I can make it be.
yeah. That's an awesome, very helpful answer. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Anything else for you today?
I think that's it.
All right. Well, as always, delightful to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for raising a hand to talk to us. I will click the button at this end, which should disconnect you. Blessings. Thank you for being there. And we'll get ready to wrap up. It's a Wednesday, so there's no support group tonight, but there will be one tomorrow night. As my grandmother would say, God willing and the creek don't rise. And I mentioned EFT tapping. If you're new to this and you haven't heard about EFT tapping, I recommend people go to YouTube and type in Brad Yates How to Tap. It'll put you in touch with about a 5-minute video on how to do the tapping. And beyond that, you can type in your YouTube engine Brad Yates anxiety, Brad Yates back pain, Brad Yates insomnia, Brad Yates rage. The list goes on and on and on. He's put out hundreds of videos, very solid stuff. He stays very close to what Gary Craig, the creator of EFT, taught him. And that's why so often people say, oh my gosh, Dr. Hayes, it's like taking the class with you, because I tried to stay very close to what Gary Craig taught and put on the internet for free, and then just make that available to everybody I do therapy with and everybody in my support groups, because it's a powerful resource for many. So, thank you all for being here. I'll remind you that this show is going to end, and you'll need to turn off the app and then turn it back on when Michael and Jeannie come back on. Hopefully they'll be on live soon after this ends. I'll remind us all that we come from love. We're made of the stuff that we call love. We actually are love, and everything else is false. Blessings.